Well, welcome to the Nonprofit Renaissance podcast, where we help nonprofits go further and grow faster. I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Colin.
And I'm H.
And we are here with a super special guest today. I think you're going to love this episode. So H, why don't you talk about who we're with?
Yes, he is massive. Mainly in North America, Colin. North America. We just found out that not South America. And I'm going to have to start there because I'm kind of bummed that it's not South American. Yeah. And it was in the name all along because he's a legend in the North American
Yeah, honestly,
Mission
that one's
Board.
on you. That's honestly on you, one.
But listen, we're laughing. We've been having a good time, and I'm just messing. But we have today with us Gus Hernandez Jr., which we'll get into in a second, who serves as the director of sending churches at the North American Mission Board in NAM. Also executive pastor, Reality Church in Miami, friends and partners of ours. And prior to joining NAM, he served as mobilization pastor in Long Hollow Church, you might have heard of, and he's earned his doctorate in pastoral leadership from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and the list goes on and on. But ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Gus Hernandez Jr. Welcome, Gus. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you guys so much for having me. It means a lot.
Absolutely.
Now tell us, you're junior, so that means there's a senior. Is that correct?
There is, man. And so I've had to really make sure to emphasize that because, I was the first believer in my family, but over time I got to lead my mom to faith, and then my dad came to faith. And he was always in hotel management, so he managed 2 properties in South Beach. And then along that journey, God called him into the nonprofit world, and then he actually helped overseas for a little bit in the Dominican Republic, and then since now has become a pastor in the States.
Wow.
So now, part of some of the circles, they'll hear Gus Hernandez, and sometimes they're referring to dad, sometimes they're referring to me. So I'm always making sure, hey, I'm super proud of my dad becoming a pastor. And the leader that he is, he's taught me so much about leadership. But yeah, it's been funny because now, we have a lot of circles we run in together in ministry. And so it's like dad, junior. I know you got some experience with that, H.
A little bit. Although my dad gave me the weirdest name, so I'm not a junior. I tried to give away junior. I said, let me name one of my boys junior. My wife's like, nah, don't do that to the child. So we did it. Yeah. We did it.
That's awesome. Do you ever pull the hey, in the ministry world, I'm the senior, you're the junior, or do you let that go? Remind that or.
That is the funny part. So I'm getting close to my 19th year in ministry, and so it's funny. I remember taking my parents on their first ever mission trip when I was pastoring a church in Tennessee, and then over time my parents became missionaries. So I joke around now because I became an MK first and then a PK, but after I was already in ministry as a pastor. So I became a missionary kid and a pastor's kid in my 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
Well, Gus, tell us, for those listening, we were messing around with the North American, South American. I'm from South America. And you were born in what part of North America,
I was
Gus?
born in Miami. Yeah.
Miami.
Born in Miami, Florida.
Which is questionable if it is North America, but we'll leave it at that. It's the capital of South America, in my opinion.
No doubt.
Tell us, North American Mission Board, you've been in for some time now, and successfully leading a large group of pastors and leaders and mobilizing churches. Tell us what they do and what you're doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Send Network is the church planting arm of the North American Mission Board. And so we like to say it this way, that Send Network is a family of churches that's planting churches everywhere for everyone. One of the things that we value is kingdom diversity. And so we want to make sure that we're planting the kind of churches that everyone is welcome to. And so we currently have this vision. It's a bold vision. We want to kind of join in God's activity to see his kingdom expand in North America by 1% over the next decade. Now, what would that look like? Man, that's approximately, if you take into account today's population, approximately reaching 2.75 million people over the next decade. Man. In order to do that, we'd have to plant roughly around 11,000 new churches that each multiply once in their lifetime and each reach 125 new believers. And so that's kind of the epic journey that we're pursuing, that we're on. We're trying to impact North America by 1% over the next 10 years.
Man, that doesn't sound like a big number, but then when you add the actual numbers in there, that's a lofty goal. That's a lofty goal. what's the approach to that? When you really expand it and actually look at what you guys are trying to do, how do you wrap your head around it?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we realize right away is you have to activate the local church. We like to say it this way, like networks don't plant churches, churches plant churches. And so what we're trying to do as a family of churches is help each local church recognize that each church can play a role on this journey. And so one of the first things we did this year as a team is we unveiled a new mobilization pathway to help churches be able to see like where they are on this pathway and what clear next steps they can take to move forward on this pathway of planting churches. And so it starts with becoming a cooperating church that can then move to being a supporting church. A supporting church is praying for planters, they're financially supporting planters, but then we want to see them take that step to becoming a sending church. Now, this is different in that instead of just supporting a different planter, a sending church is taking responsibility for that planter, and they're ensuring that they're getting the necessary coaching, the commissioning, and the care that that planter needs to go plant a church. And then from there, we don't want that to be a one and done. Like, man, now that you've planted a church, what would it look like for you to like develop a heart and a vision to keep planting? So we want to help sending churches become multiplying churches. These are churches that are starting to send out multiple planters and teams to plant churches. And then the last category is what we call a movement church. They're doing everything a multiplying church is doing, but they're leveraging their influence with other churches to catalyze other churches to join them on this journey of planting more churches. And so what we realize in order to reach a goal this lofty is it's not one network planting churches. It's a family of churches all getting involved.
No, that's very awesome. Clear. I love that, Gus. Let me ask you this. What has been one of the challenges in this season in mobilizing in these churches? What have you found?
Sure. I think one of the big challenges is sometimes churches can be just focused on what's happening inside the walls of their church, and they sometimes lose sight of God's vision for expanding his kingdom and reaching new people and new territories and taking new territory for the Lord. And so I think one of the first challenges is just helping a church to like lift their eyes from what's happening with inside the walls of their church and lift their eyes up to see what is God's heart for the nations. What's God's heart to seeing his kingdom expand? And so for us, that's a big part of what we try to do is help pastors and leaders develop that heart to develop a sending culture and a sending vision.
Now, so a quick note for our listeners, because of the nature of Gus's role, there's going to be a lot of church language, a lot of church planting language, but I assure you, there's principles here that of general leadership, of expansion that will absolutely be applicable to your nonprofit. So even if you're not in that church world or that faith-based world, man, there's some stuff here. Like again, you heard the goal. Like you need some good leadership to get where they're trying to go. And so just an encouragement. I don't want that to turn you off. There's going to be some good stuff.
And with that said, actually tell us a little bit about NAM. They're in every state in the United States. It's I think how many employees, and give us just a little bit kind of the
Sure.
scope of NAM.
Yeah. The North American Mission Board has over 600 employees, different missionaries working in different areas, from a team that's devoted to evangelism, a team devoted to church planting, that's Send Network. We have a robust chaplaincy division that's helping with chaplaincies across all of the military branches to military church planting as well. And then we also have Send Relief. So it's a huge relief ministry that not only is North America, that has actually gone global as well, and has been helping impact and meeting needs and changing lives all over the world.
Wow. So let's dive into your role then. What is that? What does it look like? What are you like actively doing day to day? How do you interact with churches when you go and reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a couple of different things. Our team tries to provide some different workshops in different parts of the country. We call these sending labs. These are these 2-day collaborative experiences to help pastors and churches kind of catch that vision and develop their first beginning steps for developing a sending culture, discovering some practical tips for how to discover, identify potential church planters, and how to develop those church planters. So we're doing a lot of those labs. We're doing a lot of coaching. We do a lot of stuff in the resources space, so providing resources for churches to develop leadership pipelines within their church, discipleship pathways, ministry training. all sorts of different things. At the end of the day, we're trying to help these churches develop what we would call a multiplication pipeline. And it has like 3 stages, like discover, develop, and deploy. And so we're trying to get them to think through, okay, how are we helping develop the people that we have within our church? What are we going to then deploy them to be able to do with the gift sets that they have? And so we're trying to help them get to that spot.
Yeah. Go ahead, H.
No question with that. We discussed this before the episode a little bit offline, but I think it's relevant for our listeners. Like half of our listeners are pastors and leaders, half are nonprofit, C-suite, business development, or they're in, growth development. When it comes to multi-site, and a lot of churches we work with, their strategy for they're probably sending a campus pastor to just launch a campus of their own. How does that fit into this? How have you seen it work, not work? We can joke around a little bit about what it actually means, and feel free to do so, because it's not cookie cutter for everybody, right? And God calls different churches to do different things.
No doubt.
But with a lot of churches trying to do their own thing, my own way, has that been a challenge for you? And how have you overcome that?
No, I think what we're very open and honest about is there's not like a one size fits all approach. Like there's no one way that this is the ultimate and the only way to do it. So we have several multi-site churches that are part of our strategy and that are part of our network. In fact, what we say is, man, I mean, in essence, and this is where I poked a little bit of fun offline, right? So I'll say it here. In many ways, multi-siting is just slow church plants. Like if you fast forward some of the multi-site churches from 20, 30 years ago, they expanded and did a great job reaching new areas. And then over time, what they did is as those campuses got super healthy and as the org just got much bigger, they just planted them as autonomous churches. And so it was just slow church planting. But it started with a vision and an idea, right?
We're going to have to use that for the thumbnail and the teaser clip, right? It's like, Gus Hernandez, multi-site is just slow church planting.
It really is. And so we believe it's a very effective strategy. I mean, that's one of the steps for us is identifying those churches that have that heart, like a good multi-siting church. What you recognize is that they have a heart and a passion to reach and engage new people. They've developed great leadership development principles to raise up a campus pastor, to give him leadership. They've had to design their system and structure to meet needs in multiple geographic areas, to reach different neighborhoods. Man, they've done such great work to try to problem solve and to add value to their organization and to their community. So I believe they're definitely part of it.
So you used 3 words. See if I can remember them. I know develop was one of them.
Discover?
Discover, develop, deploy.
So let's talk about, can we go through that process? So when you go to a church, what's Discover all about? What are they discovering just this passion and desire to church plant? Are they discovering actual people, all the above?
Yeah, I think all the above. One is you want them to kind of discover their vision for sending and multiplying. But then that usually starts with, hey, if we're going to plant another church, where do we find this planter? And a lot of times churches feel like they're somewhere out there. And what we're trying to do is like, man, the planters of tomorrow are sitting in your pews today. And so if you can just change your mindset and say like, man, I think the future church planter is actually here. And it may be somebody that's already part of my church. So it's helping them kind of think through what would make for a good church planter or somebody who's going to be a leader within your church, right? So let's move like the church planting from the equation for a minute. It's still a great principle. It's like, who do you already have already connected to your organization? And what traits and characteristics or skills have you already observed and noticed? And then it's about having that I see in you conversation. Like, hey, man, I don't know if you realize this, but I see this in you. Have you ever noticed this or thought about this or had any conversations about this? And oftentimes, like, man, I have thought about that. Or, someone has pointed that out. It's like, man, I see this in you. And I believe that you could be this. And it's like starting off with discovering those potential leaders in your organization. And then once you discover them, the natural question is, what are you going to do as an organization to develop this leader? Like, what is it that you want them to learn, master, and improve in order to reach this desired destination that you have for them? So that's that develop piece. That's helping them think through, okay, so you have somebody who wants to step up to the plate and do this thing. What now? What's next? What are you going to do to help coach them, train them, equip them on this journey? And then lastly is the deployment. That's like, all right, activate their skill sets, activate their gifts. I think one of the most frustrating things is to have someone identify something in you train you up and then not give you any outlets to use your gifts and your skill sets. So for organizations to think through what are the avenues where I'm going to be able to deploy people to leverage how they're wired, how they're gifted, all those different things to put into practice.
And so I'm thinking of the nonprofit here as well. To take this, nonprofits, just like churches, are looking for high quality leaders to go and lead and expand whatever they're doing. A lot of times that's a big part of that is going to be that development process. What is it? So once you've kind of, you go into a church, you help them discover, help them find people. What does that development really look like for us? Let's say I'm someone who feels called to church planting. What does that development process look like for them? And how does NAM and sending churches step in there?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think two different approaches. We have a self-discovery approach. And this can come in later when we talk about like some of the things that impacted the way I do ministry and just work, is the importance of self-discovery in adult learning and education. I think instead of just doing like an info dump, like this is all the stuff you got to do, being able to guide churches and leaders through a self-discovery process to help them kind of come up with their own plan. And so we do forms of that in our training and our collaborative environments, learning environments, where we're helping use a series of questions and post-it tear sheet exercises to help them kind of discover like, oh yeah, these are the things I find to be really important. These are the things I'm really good at and passionate about. And these are the things I would love to pass on to a future leader, right? Identify that, figure out a system. And so what we try to do is like four keywords. The first is like a phrase. The first one's a phrase, beginning with the end in mind. Like, what is it that you ultimately want this person to become? Like when you have clarity in that, it's powerful. Like, you know what you're ultimately aligning all of your stuff to produce. So that's the first step in the process. Helping leaders, like, what is it you want people to become? Once you have that clarity, you can reverse engineer and help people achieve that goal. And so then the three words we use are relational training environments, rhythms, and content. So what are the environments that I'm inviting someone into? What are the rhythms? How often are we going to engage in that space and meet in that space? And then when we meet in those spaces, what is the content or the skill or the craft that I want to teach you and get you to master in those spaces? And like by helping them just kind of think through that, they can look back and say like, okay, so I want to meet with this person weekly or monthly in this setting. And I want to cover this book, this resource, this podcast, this tool, and help them produce this desired outcome. So it's all connected. Those are kind of some of the things that we do when we're coming alongside coaching churches.
And what is the expectation for when you're working for a church? Because obviously you're trying to help them build these systems. So are you guys more of just like an advisor? And, like what does it look like for a church? Like, what are they responsible for? Are they kind of like responsible for moving this along? How does that all work?
Yeah, they're responsible for kind of moving this along. We can serve as like champion, as like a consultant, as somebody to inspire you on that journey. I think when it gets into like planting through Send Network, we have like a robust assessment process where a church planting candidate will have to go through a 2-day assessment retreat, and they'll have experts and practitioners and leaders with lots of experience kind of put them through an evaluation process, and they assess for like 8 specific skills. And so churches then are trying to prepare a candidate to go through assessment. And then on the back end of assessment, that planter will get one of 3 responses, ready to move forward. So they're ready to plant. They go straight into our coaching. Needs further development. Like, okay, you have a lot of what we're looking for in a church planter, and we think you can be a good planter, but based on the assessment, I think it'd be good for you to spend maybe 6 months working on these skill sets with your sending church. Or the third option is like a redirect based on all the different people in the room. They just felt like maybe church planting is not the thing that you should pursue, and you should redirect your gifts and passions to another area of ministry. And so those are usually the 3 outcomes. So what the sending church is responsible for is helping first prepare a candidate for assessment, and then coming after assessment, following through with their growth development plan to help them grow with the skill sets needed to plant a healthy, thriving church.
Gus, tell me about assessment. Feels like boot camp. Is it a little boot campish? Is it a little bit, I have to meet that mark?
No, I think it's more like you come with your spouse, and there's going to be exercises where we get to hear your vision. Like, why do you want to plant a church? So you get to practice communication, vision casting. There's going to be a communication exercise where part of leading a church is being able to communicate and preach and teach God's word faithfully. So you'll preach a message in front of a room of seasoned pastors and practitioners. We're going to give you feedback and evaluation. There's a counseling component to it. There's opportunities for you and your wife to have meetings with other pastors and their wives. And so they're going to do a lot of stuff on family dynamics, relational dynamics. We use the Prepare and Enrich as a marital resource through that process as well. And so they're just trying to like look at some different areas. There's parts of it that's very worshipful. There's parts of it where for sure it is definitely exhausting because you're going from preaching to vision casting to like a counseling session to like talking with a room. So there's different elements to it, but it is a very robust retreat.
So there's no like push-ups qualification or anything like that, or
no, that's not a bad idea though, right?
I think it should start.
Just to test the heart a little bit.
6 a.m. I think
physically
6 a.m.
and emotionally.
6 a.m. Take some CrossFit.
Yeah,
if you're fit for the cross, you got to CrossFit first. That's it, man. We'll
okay. All right, we're gonna go ahead and end this. We're gonna end the episode right there, and I'm gonna go rebuke H for whatever just happened. Now, well, so I come from the H and I both come from the church world, and church planting assessments typically can be pretty robust. It's not just a like you said, it's not just a one day thing. It's not an afternoon. Like, tell us your heart. Okay, go have fun. Like, you're really evaluating somebody because church planting is hard. There's its own set of challenges in church planting, but then also just leading an organization and being responsible for one is really difficult. What is the necessity for having that in church planting? Have you seen situations where maybe there isn't as robust of a process on the front end and it's gone wrong? Like, talk a little bit about the importance of having that, I guess, leadership vetting, if you will.
Yeah, I think what you realize is if you have a healthier leader who's prepared and equipped, they'll survive the journey of planting. Planting is already extremely difficult. It's one of the toughest things you can do. For me in my ministry years, I think it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's been like I've led at churches of 10,000 people, 6,000 people, 3,000. I would say planting a church from scratch, which I planted with my friend Carlos Lillette, probably the hardest thing I have ever done in all 18 years of ministry, for sure. And so it's extremely difficult. And so you want well-prepared, well-assessed leaders to go through a robust process to help them on that journey. I think when you have people just kind of go out there without either the right resources, the right training, sure, they could plant a thriving church. I'm not saying that can't happen if you don't go through this process. I think you have a higher success rate in healthy planters and healthy churches being planted if there's a lot of intentionality on the front end.
And so, again, thinking of like, say, the nonprofit leader, if they're looking at this and saying, okay, well, maybe I see a need to have something like this to help evaluate leaders. Maybe it doesn't need to be as robust as it is for like a church planting thing. Where can they go to find that? Are there resources and I might be putting you a little bit on the spot here, but are there resources that they can go to say like, this is what this looks like, this is what it takes? How do I even get started there?
Yeah. So in my previous role, I served as a mobilization pastor at Long Hollow in the Middle Tennessee area. And so there was an organization called Mission Increase that I was exposed to in the Nashville area. Nashville had so many nonprofits that were started up and booming. But as you start spending time, like our church would connect with and work with several nonprofits. And what I quickly realized is some had a very robust vision and a strategy and an idea, and they were executing it extremely well. Some people had a vision, but they hadn't thought through their systems, their process, and how they were going to carry out that vision. This entity and organization called Mission Increase exists to help work alongside nonprofits at various different levels from like, okay, so you have this vision, you have this ideal dream. All right, let's help you walk through how to implement that dream. And it's totally a ministry to them. Like it doesn't even cost them anything. They go raise their support to just be coaches for nonprofits to have healthy, good system structures, leaderships. Like even the simple things like how do you go about establishing a board? How do you have accountability in your nonprofit? What's your leadership structure going to be? What's your funding mechanism going to be? So Mission Increase, man, they became such a great blessing, and they have several outposts across North America. So I think they have their headquarters on the West Coast, but they've expanded to several different states. But that'd be a great organization. If you have a Mission Increase in your city, they offer free workshops all the time for nonprofits on leadership development, how to establish and maintain a board, vision casting, fundraising, like all these different things that are super helpful in the nonprofit world. But yeah, that would be one resource. I'd try to connect with a Mission Increase and see what coaching and workshops are in my city.
Gus, you mentioned one of the hardest things was church planting, with your friend Carlos and reality. Tell me how you manage the bivocational, co-vocational, the multi-vocational. How do you do that? Because that alone, how do you keep track of all the hats? How do you? Because that's part of the challenge, right? And a lot of ministers, a lot of nonprofit leaders are doing the same, right? They're supplementing, they're figuring out fundraising at the same time. Give us some tips and tricks or some lessons you're learning.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, because I've chosen to kind of live in both of those worlds, you do know that you take on a lot. And I think a couple of things that have helped me is, man, I live by my schedule, and I have certain days that I have blocked off as like no meeting days, because they're my white space to be able to create, to think, to plan for the future. I think you can get caught so much in managing or wearing multiple hats that you start saying yes to everything. So it's like being able to like have structured times in my week where like, this is my time to create new content and resources. This is my time to do coaching and meetings, and kind of sticking to that. So for me, it's being kind of very structured has helped me take on more stuff. I don't have a hard time saying no to people. So that side of it has been good for me. I know other leaders do have a hard time saying no. And so I recognize that's a personality trait. That's just you being able to understand how you're wired and what's going to best work for you. I would say what's helped me a ton, calendaring, sticking to a good rhythm in my weeks. Not to say you can't adjust it or tweak it. I do a lot of travel, so I have to understand that some of my weeks are going to look different because I'm traveling across country to set up some meetings. But having some margin on the front end and on the back end of those trips to be able to rest well, because I think early on in my ministry, I didn't rest well, but like truly Sabbathing, like taking a day to not do work and just recover, refocus on God and family, huge. I think that's so important for any leader who's running at a high pace. So I think, being structured helps a ton.
Yeah.
Having a game plan for your week, and then having some rhythms of rest built in to help you recover and move forward.
Man, that is huge. I probably am on maybe the opposite spectrum, and as far as saying no, that's naturally something that's pretty difficult for me. And I had to learn through that. I spent some time in ministry as well, and there were a lot of situations where I had to learn that. And one of the things that I think helped me was, regardless of where, if that's easy for you, if it's not, you are always saying yes and no to some things. And so understanding that when you're saying yes to everybody, a lot of times that means you're going to be saying no to your family, and you're going to be saying no to the things that really are actually important. And so, just being able to develop that skill and put that in the right context is huge. I love that you said that, because it's so simple and I think it's overlooked, but man, the ability to say yes to the right things.
Let me hear. Yeah, sure I got this right. You're saying that you have a hard time saying no, that you say yes. Because what I've received in our relationship, in our engagements,
interesting.
When I call you,
let's talk through it.
When I ask you to hang out, when I ask you for lunch, it's been no, I'm busy. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. Well, I thought that's what our weekly counseling session was for, but we can talk about it here. You've got the reformed me now. You've got I've gone through a process here, is what I'm trying to say.
I see. Just messing.
The answer is always yes for you.
One more thing to that.
Please, Gus. Yeah.
This kind of helped me. It started with like when I was having a really hard time saying no early on. A mentor of mine pulled me aside. He was observing my patterns and an unhealthy practice, which he was gracious enough to call out on me early, so it didn't affect me later on. So I'm always grateful for that. But he said this simple phrase. He says, "Ministry never ends." So if you keep saying yes to everything, there's never going to be a point in time where you're like, "Oh, finally, I accomplished it all." He's like, it never ends. I was like, so make sure you're setting up some healthy boundaries to protect your health and your longevity in ministry, because there's always going to be more ministry. You're never going to get to the end like, I finally finished it all. It's like, there's always more. So if you think that you have this savior complex and you got to be the solution to everyone's problem, you're going to burn out and you're going to crash. And so he just
Right.
helped me just kind of identify, man, there's always something else that needs to be done. But if you're going to stay in this game long term, you got to have healthy boundaries, and you can't say yes to all this. And in essence, Colin, just what you said, he was saying very similar. He's like, when you say yes to all these things, you're saying no to something else. And at the time I was married and I was about to have my first kid. And he's like, you're going to be saying no to your wife and your kids if you keep saying yes to every opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, it was just like a great like leadership moment where this seasoned, experienced leader was just calling out something in me that I just was not seeing. It was like a blind spot.
Yeah.
And he was just being loving and gracious enough to like, hey man, let me speak some truth into your life.
So while we're on this topic of saying no, we talked a little bit about the assessment process, and you mentioned how, there's basically three outcomes that someone can have when they go to an assessment. It's either yes, it's either a green light, a yellow light, or a red light. Talk through that a little bit. How do you make those decisions? How do you communicate that? If it's a yellow light, how do you communicate that? If it's a red light, how do you communicate that in a way that doesn't cause that person to go into a spiral? Like talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. And so, man, just to be clear, that's on the planter development team. So I'm on the mobilization team. So I don't have those conversations, but I have been part of some of those meetings. And so what they're doing is all the assessors from the retreat will spend a few hours processing their insights and observations from all the different exercises. They do invite the sending church rep. So whoever the sending church is for that candidate is part of these meetings to listen in, to be able to chime in.
That's great. That's
answer
huge.
questions. So like, hey, so we didn't quite get this. You spend more time with him. Have you noticed this to be an issue in his life? Or we thought this was an issue. Maybe you think differently. Like, let's hear your perspective. So they're able to participate in those deliberations and like have part in that conversation. So I think that's super helpful. How they communicate it, our field staff takes time to write up a report, pray through it, think through it, and then schedule a one-on-one to be able to process the findings of the retreat with that candidate. So that way it's personal, it's very shepherding, it's an opportunity to coach and to help have that heart-to-heart conversation. So it doesn't feel like cold and rigid and distant. It's very much very detailed, very thought out. A lot of processing goes into a lot of prayer.
Yeah. And it sounds like from what you're saying that it's never a yellow, not right now, go figure it out, or a red, we don't think this is for you, deal with that on your own. It sounds like there's always some level of, we're going to continue to guide you. If it's yellow, here's what we need to work on to get you to green. Right. And if it's a red, how do we find where you need to be? I mean, and that's, so if whatever organization you're in, talking about leadership development, that right there is huge, because I think you can damage somebody pretty significantly by just saying, nope, sorry, go figure it out on your own, as opposed to saying, no, but let's try to find this other path. Because I think you can a lot of times take that person and once they find the right thing, the right fit, then they're wildly productive. And you know what I mean? So like, that's huge.
Yeah. Question, Gus, in the leadership development formation, I think part of you have a doctorate in pastoral ministry, which my understanding was a lot to do with discipleship, groups, formation. Tell us a little bit about your thesis and how you would break it down in church world in a practical scenario today. How are you doing that at reality at the other churches you've been a part of? Tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did my doctorate in pastoral leadership at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Loved it. Great experience. One of the things that they did is it was cohort style. So it was 10 students going through this process over the course of 3 years together. And so you build like just an incredible friendship. When it came down to the writing element of that doctorate, I chose to write on basically like developing a strategy for multiplying in-home groups. So I'm super passionate about disciple making, super passionate about developing community in churches. And so that was something that intrigued me. So I had to read 40 books on small group ministry and kind of help do this project in 2 phases. Phase 1 was to be able to identify the healthy elements of a group. So before you can multiply something, one of the things you have to realize, like, what makes it worth replicating? Like, what makes it healthy and good that I would want to take this environment and see more of those environments? So the first part of the process is like, man, what are the things that make for a healthy group? The second half of the project focused on what were the key components that were conducive to seeing a multiplication culture in the church kick off. This kind of reproducing groups. And so, man, those things came out to be 5 simple things that kind of surfaced through research and interviewing different practitioners, reading a bunch of different books. First and foremost, it started with vision casting. And this is beautiful because a lot of what I'm sharing is not just conducive to church work. It's actually thinking through just multiplication and several other things. It was vision casting, like knowing that it starts with the leaders of an organization or a church, developing and then sharing that vision with the people that they're leading. The second was leadership development, like making sure that there was a process to be able to develop the leaders that you were going to be able to then discover, develop, and deploy. There comes those 3 words again, right? And then third was having strategic training in your organization, your church. If you're going to be discovering, developing, deploying leaders, you have to have some form of strategic training as part of your process to be able to develop these leaders. The fourth one is the thing that would be like church unique, but you can easily adapt to any organization, is having some church-wide campaigns that the church was leveraging as huge on-ramps. So like you're doing the hard work of casting vision, you're doing the work of developing leaders, you're then training these leaders throughout the year. Now you have some huge milestones in your church where you have these specific on-ramps for people to hear it from the stage, air war matching the ground war, right, of your tactics for marketing, for inward and outward, explanation of groups and how they're important, why they matter. And then the fifth, this is the one that I think most churches overlook, and it has to deal with data. It's developing your systems of measurements and accountability. Like, what data are you needing to gather and capture that's going to inform your leaders if this thing's working or not working, or what needs to be modified and tweaked. And so for us, like, those were the 5 things. Like, when churches had those 5 things in action, they were seeing groups multiply on a very consistent pace. And so vision casting that led to leadership development, that led to strategic training, that led to church-wide campaigns, and then undergirded by a good system of measurements and accountability.
Love that.
Those are the key components to multiplying groups.
So when does the book come out, Gus?
I was going to say that right there was for free, everyone. Just want to let you know.
Come on.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people ask for that one. I need to get down and just do that. Yeah.
Come on, I'm serious. We'll back you, support you, and sponsor the.
Absolutely, man. We'll help you market and everything.
Can you commit right now to releasing the book first, right here? Oof. No, Nam's got dibs. I know. So, Gus,
H is committing to edit right now. He's committing. He'll edit it for you completely.
I'll get my buddy.
H, you're gonna be my editor. There you go.
Done. Yeah, in Portuguese maybe.
Let's go. Man, they're the ones doing it already. They're experts in this.
Oh, it's exponential down there. Question about books. You said you read 40 books on the topic. Put you on the spot right now. Is there what's number one? What's the top? What's the source? What's Q?
Oh man, dude, that is tough. On that space, I would say, because you can rate them on so many different levels, from like practicality to like details, I would go with simplicity, because I believe this is one of my mantras. I'm going to give you a secret here. Simplicity is the key to reproducibility. Complex plans and systems rarely multiply. So when something becomes so complex, it usually doesn't go beyond 1st gen, 2nd gen. But if you do the hard work to refine something and make it simple, it's easy to reproduce and internalize. So I would say Chris Surratt's book, Leading Small Groups, was a simple, straightforward, enough detail to like be robust, but simple enough to like hand a leader in your church, man, read this, and it's going to give you the foundations of being a great group leader and what your role is as a group leader to help launch another group out of your group. Great book. So I would say that one. I use that in my church. So
Gus,
of all the 40 books, that's the one I'm using with my leaders. Yeah.
I love hearing that from you, because I mean, theologian, doctorate in ministry, got a master's in divinity. You can go on and on about, and we can exegete all day here and talk about, but the simplicity, the ability to remember something, to then pass it on to your, right? If a 5th grader can't grasp it. So there's levels to it, but I love hearing that from you, because most times we, in church world, we get lost in trying to be so complex and deep in our own spaghetti of thoughts that nobody else can take it. And so I love hearing that. I love it.
Yeah. I think sometimes we feel, go ahead, Gus. You're the expert.
I was going to say, to speak to that, H, there were a few books, and I'm not going to name these because of publicity, that as
we'll
went to try, some of the books I read when I wanted to go follow up and meet with the author and see their system in action at the church, as I probed deeper, it was like great in theory, but they never panned out in practice. And so some of these books that got remembered, like, oh, dude, read this guy's book. It's amazing. I read it. I was like, yeah, it is amazing. Let me go see this in action. And then you go spend time like, man, actually, we never implemented it here at the church. It was too complicated. So you're like, oh, wow. So it's great in theory, but not in practice. And I think too many leaders in the church world will operate too much in that framework. Yeah.
Well,
Great
it's
theory,
like
no practice.
how good is a sermon in Latin if I can't understand it? Right? And it's how is it tangible and practical? But I love that. I love that. Colin, I'll let you go too, but I'm going to go old school here. I grew up in the purpose-driven era here. My dad was a Rick Warren fanboy.com. So we grew up in that assimilation groups, and in some ways, Rick was king of that, of bringing simplicity to the complex, right? Even in the SBC world, he simplified some things to the point that he got called out and like, nah, it's watered down. There's no substance, but it worked, right? The baseball diamond and step 1, step 2, step 3. Is that still, where do you see the climate? Where do you see the state of the church in discipleship, in assimilation today? What are the trends? What are some warning signs, that you would talk to leaders about?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see like a renewed sense of like the importance of having a discipleship pathway. And very similar to what Rick was trying to do. I think Rick was trying to move through groups of assimilation to get people assimilated and activated in the church. And now people are doing a very similar process, but like thinking through more of like that end game, like what is it that we ultimately want to see produced? And so some churches are starting with church planter, like this is what I want to produce. And then they're backing up from their systems and thinking through like, what's my discipleship process going to look like? What's my leadership development process going to look like? And then what's my residency process going to look like to produce that? Others are just starting with, hey, I just want a reproducible, faithful disciple, like somebody who's in love with Jesus, loves God, loves people. Okay, that's great. How am I going to help someone go from unengaged to engaged to become that disciple? And they're thinking through their systems and their process. So I think what I'm seeing is more and more churches recognizing the need to have a consistent pathway. And it's kind of moving away from, in the last probably 2 to 3 decades, I think the church offered more of a menu instead of a roadmap. So that's kind of language that we use. We want to provide people a map, not a menu. It was like the buffet. These are all the services and goods we can offer you. You pick and choose what you want. And so you get different outcomes because you're like, well, I like this part of the church. I'll take this part. I don't really care about this. I'm not going to do this. Now you're seeing churches do the hard work of like, man, what's a spiritual map with a destination that we want to point people to, and then the directions to get to that destination? Like, what can we do to help you achieve this destination that we have for you?
I love that language.
That's a trend that we're starting to see.
Is that original? Is that yours, or are you borrowing that from somebody?
If not, it's a combination. There are some stuff like when I worked with Replicate that we would do stuff like that. So we talk about, like, I use this in Send Network resources. So we talk about determining the destination and then providing the directions to reach. So kind of using a GPS illustration. A couple things you need to have when you use a GPS. This goes for any organization. You got to know where you are right now. So the harsh reality as a leader to define reality. Like, what is the current condition of your org? Like, where are you right now? Then you determine the destination. Where do you want to go? And then the strategy is like, how do I get there? All right.
Gus,
so that's
love
huge.
that. I love it so much because I'm in it too, right? In my church, and we've all lived this where if you have the menu, I want to skip the dessert.
Exactly.
I just want to, or I'm here for the drinks. I'm just here for the for salad. So I'm anemic. There's no protein. So there's this kind of scattered. And then when it's the map, it's a beautiful thing because there's a destination, like you said, you want to provide direction. But what's the condition of the vehicle, right? Can it get there fast? Can it not? Can I even take off?
Yeah.
Do I have fuel to even get on the journey? So I love that analogy. I'm a visual person, so to me that kind of clicks right away in helping people take steps or get on the journey. Go ahead, Colin.
Well, I was curious. Are there times where you reach out to a church or a church reaches out to you guys, brings you in, and the organization is not at a place that's ready to send somebody out? What does that look like? What is there some type of standard that it's like this is kind of the profile of a church that isn't quite ready, and this is typically what they need to do? How do you go through that?
Man, yeah, that does happen. In fact, last week we had just had a directors meeting with our VPs at Send Network to talk about this issue. of like in our role, like as a church planting family, a network of church planting, where is our role in that? Like, as we're working with the church and helping inspire and coach them to develop a vision for sending, maybe on that process of building that relationship with them, and you start asking questions. Hey, tell me about your process for discipling people. Tell me about your leadership development. And you start to recognize, man, they don't have that. Like, what's our role in that? And so I think we're still trying to figure out what is our role in that as an organization. I think obviously we have the posture and the heart to want to serve and help leaders as much as we can, but recognizing that we serve at the SBC, right? So we are a family of autonomous churches. Each pastor is, the leader of his church, and we as a network are not dictating to you what you can and should do. We can obviously share best practices and hopefully inspire you to develop some of these systems to help you be more consistent as a church. I obviously am super passionate about that. I think that's one of the differences between where I am now at Send Network and one of my previous roles where I was a paid consultant for Replicate Ministries. So you were hiring me to come to your church and help you think through your systems and make changes to your systems, where now I come alongside to serve you and to help you and to see how your church can get involved with church planting, not necessarily to serve as your consultant for disciple making pathways, leadership development. So just a little bit difference in like what my role is now, but obviously something I'm super passionate about. I would love to see more leaders develop systems.
Gus, we've been part of cultures that sometimes promote feedback, but don't necessarily know how to provide or implement feedback. And you could say toxic cultures, depending where you're coming from, or some that are. Tell me about you and feedback, what you've learned, and kind of some of the best practices you've implemented.
Man, that's great. Man, honestly, I would say this would be one of the most important growth opportunities that occurred in my life. However, like some of it stems from first observing like how not to do it. Like I was part of some cultures that they leverage the word feedback as just a way to like destroy someone and tear you down.
Control,
and
right?
So kind of control and fear, like creating a fear culture. And so it was stifling the organization. As I got to grow in my leadership and have more responsibilities, one of the things that I did is I developed a mantra for my teams that I lead, and we recite this when we're going to feedback meetings. And here's the mantra: it's like, feedback is meant to be helpful, not hurtful. So if you understand, like, the reason I'm giving you this feedback is because I truly care for you, and I truly, from a genuine posture, want to help you get better as a leader and advance our organization forward. So knowing that that's going to matter how I present the feedback, like how I deliver that feedback matters. And the posture I'm taking, like I'm not looking for things to just bring you down, to like let my insecurities come out, but like I truly love you and care for you, right? So when we walk into those feedback meetings, we know our mantra and we know the posture that we're taking. So that means we're going to let our guards down. We'll receive it because the person giving it to me truly loves me and cares for me, and they're not being disrespectful in the way they're dishing it out. And then even challenges me as a leader when I'm giving feedback to one of my coworkers, one of my teammates, or even sometimes a superior, right? Like how I give that feedback matters. The way I deliver it, the way I present it. I mean, I use questions like this to even incite and invite feedback from me as a leader. So one thing that I do when I'm meeting with my staff, I do one-on-ones, is like, hey, how can I serve you better? That's a simple question, man. End the meetings with that. I do it as a pastor. When I take a church member out, I even ask them that. Hey, as a pastor of this church, how can I serve you better? I do this as a parent. I do one-on-one dates with my daughters. And at the end of the date, I'm always asking my baby girls, how can I be a better dad? Early on, at first they're like, oh, no, you're the best dad, da, da, da. As they've gotten older, they sit there and they think now.
I've got
like,
thoughts.
I've got some
Dad,
thoughts. Actually, Dad, And so like just embodying that culture, like I want to receive feedback. I want to invite it. I think there was a season because I saw it expressed poorly that I resented it and tried to avoid it. Now that I see the value in feedback and knowing how to give it and how to receive it, and feedback to me is one of the best things that you can ever receive as a leader, as somebody who wants to grow in your profession and your skills.
So let's just real quick. What are some quick fire ways if someone wants to take this and implement it? They're saying like, you know what, I do need a better system of feedback from a leader and from a employee perspective or whatever. What are some? How do they do that? How can they implement that right now?
Man, I think questioning your motives is really important on this process. Like, hey, why do I want to give this feedback? Am I trying to assert dominance? Am I trying to like put someone in their place? Am I trying to establish my authority? So I think that as a person who's wanting to give the feedback, it's important to like internally process like your motivation behind it. Is it truly because I'm trying to help this person? All right, then really the question is, how can we get better as a team? And the feedback I'm giving this person is centered around how can we get better at what we're trying to achieve? How can we do better as an organization? How can our product improve? Like now you're taking it and it's our team wins when everyone is winning. And it just kind of changes the dynamics, really, because you're no longer just like targeting just one individual. So I think that's a big part of it, is the posture and the motivation behind why you're trying to give the feedback. Now, if the leader has established that culture, then as the employee receiving it, you understand that the feedback being given is within a certain context, and you've established trust with your leader. I'm a huge Patrick Lencioni fan, so I love a lot of his writings, right? Establishing that trust on a team, huge, right? If you don't have the trust, it's going to be super hard to develop a good feedback culture. So I'm anticipating that we get to this stage in the conversation because we've done the hard work as a leader to establish trust on our team. When trust is established, man, you can have some straightforward conversations, some loving conflict, which I think conflict is good on a team. So I'm one of those guys. Like, I believe healthy conflict is good because it's two people passionately fighting for the best future of the organization, right? That's good, healthy conflict. It's not good. Bad conflict. That's like pride trying to overcome pride. That's bad conflict. Like ego versus ego. This is like, hey, man, we want what's best for the organization. We want what's best for our nonprofit. We want what's best for our church. Okay. Then let's have some robust dialogue because we've already established that we trust each other and we respect each other, right? So that's there. Now we can go pretty intense toe to toe. Like, I love serving with Carlos, right? The guy that I co-planted this church with here in Miami. And we'll have some fun, like back and forth, great conversations. We're able to have that straightforward dialogue because we've worked so hard at establishing a true love and respect for one another. Like, we truly love and respect each other. And we know that our motives are, we want what's best for the church moving forward. So we understand our motivations. Like, when we bring something up to invite some of that healthy conflict, we're not questioning each other's motives. Like, man, why do you think he brought that up? Or like, what's the ultimate end game they're trying? No, like, we have a system of trust and relationship established. So when we know we're going into those intense conversations, in the back of our mind, we're not filtering it through like, I wonder what their real motive is.
Yeah.
It's more like, hey, we trust each other. We know that we're trying to fight for the best future forward for our organization. And we want the best idea to win out, not just like my idea or his idea. What's the best idea? So stuff like that, I think is helpful.
That, so good. And I've seen that at play, Gus. I've seen that at play between you guys and how you guys have led. So, which is great. That's why you're a great XP for him, for that team, for such a time as this, in the not so fun, not so sexy season of growth and hard work that,
it's a grind, man.
That you guys are in. But hey, real quick on this one, just asking for a friend, like just for some feedback here. How would you give Colin some feedback on how he could be a better co-host? How would you do that?
This is good. No, I'm excited to hear this because a lot of times you're talking about some of the negative ways to give feedback, and I was having flashbacks to conversations with H. So I'd love to, please.
Yeah. No, and so feedback doesn't always have to be negative, right? Feedback can also be just positive.
So
here's some feedback I noticed at the beginning was, hey, early on I get started with my story. And because of like what I do for a living, what I'm super passionate about, obviously going to lean heavy towards like church world. You did such a wise thing to like pause for a minute, knowing your target audience that I don't live in this world every day. But hey, pause for a minute. We've got leaders from sorts of like all different nonprofits. And so he is all in this church world because that's what he's called to do. But there's principles here that are going to be broadly applicable to all these. So I thought that was fantastic. That was you capturing something and being able to like make a pivot, knowing your target audience different from the world that I live in, and you made an adjustment. So, man, I wanted to recognize that adjustment was fantastic.
Come on.
Thank you so much.
Look at that.
Appreciate that.
This podcast is going to get boosted and marketed. He's going to paid ads to spread. Just this little clip right here. He's going to this little clip. Yeah, this is
Gus, I'm actually auditioning for a new co-host for the podcast, and I'd like you to throw your name in the hat if you wouldn't mind.
Confidence boosters.
Not a trust builder there, Colin. Not a trust builder. Just
messing. So good. Well, so good.
Before we wrap here, Colin, Gus, tell us how somebody listening can find you, learn more about what you're doing, more about NAM, if the church or even a parachurch, a nonprofit, and how they can get involved.
Yeah, so sendnetwork.com is our website. So definitely go there. You'll find everything from mobilizing planters. So if someone is interested in wanting to start a church, or is maybe sensing that calling, there's an opportunity on that website for them to find out more and connect with somebody from our network. If it's a church that wants to reach out to see how they can be activated, there's a spot on that website for churches to be able to be mobilized. And so they just fill out that form. Somebody from our team reaches out and establishes contact connection. And then we start that relationship there to see how we can serve that church. As far as me, I'm mostly on Instagram at Gus Hernandez Jr. I'm also on X, Twitter. I don't know what to call it these days, but it's mostly for reading because it became so weird and toxic over the last few years. It's like I ain't got time with everything that I'm doing to engage in banter. So I mostly just use it to read what's trending and follow some of the leaders that I like and enjoy. So those are some of the spaces where I'm at.
That's awesome. Yeah, listeners, we're linking all that below. We'll retroactively link to Gus's book when that's written, and you can jump on that right away because it's going to be amazing. Gus, thanks so much for being on. H, any last thoughts? Any last questions or anything?
No, he said it all. So many good takeaways. I'm going to have to review my notes here and make sure you do the same. But Gus, thanks so much for being with us, man. Thanks for all the work. The cool thing with Gus, I get to see it in practice and in action. So this is not just theory. This is not just, he's passionate. He's living it out. And I get to see the fruit of it down in Miami where friends and family are part of his church. And so appreciate what you do, man, your heart and your serving and how you sacrificially give and of your time and resources for the kingdom. So blessings to you and to the family.
Thanks, guys. Honor and privilege.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. And we will see you next time on the Nonprofit Renaissance.
Thanks again for listening to the Nonprofit Renaissance. We hope it ignites a renaissance in you and helps you go further and grow faster. Be sure to share, rate, and subscribe. And if you'd like to recommend or be a guest on our show, send us an email at podcast@verseCreative.com.